Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm David Bird with Reality Reimagined. I'm an award-winning photographer and Photoshop artist that specializes in fantasy composite art. And today we're going to conclude the gel photography series with part 3, the edit. It is so like artistically pretentious to call it that. And I thought that when I made the previous video, it just makes me laugh. The edit. We're gonna go through the edit today of my pictures. The edit. It's so cheesy. Anyway, let's break down what we're going to do in today's video. So we're gonna start with two separate images that are almost identical, and these two images were captured by two different camera bodies from Canon. One, the Canon EOS R, the other one, the Canon EOS R5. Why are we doing this comparison? Well, we're using the new lighting instruments from Luminate called Full Spectrum. And with these units that I absolutely love, it did require me to make a change to the standard settings that I like to photograph at when I'm using strobes and light modifiers in the studio. So I had to push the ISO in both of these camera bodies significantly higher than I typically do so that I could close down the aperture to get it closer to an f8 or an f11. So these first two images are almost identical. I just simply want to see how the noise is being handled when we take the images into Adobe Camera Raw to begin the processing of them to take them into Photoshop itself. Now, speaking of comparison videos, I have a video coming very soon to the channel this week where we'll do a comparison of the Canon EOS R and the R5 using the Canon RF 24-270 f2.8 lens. So many Canon things to throw out here. Anyway, so I had done a comparison video not too long ago on the channel where I compared the Canon EOS R, R5, and R6, and a lot of comments came in on that video from folks saying you need to use the most current RF glass for Canon because it will give you an even better comparison between those camera bodies. In that previous video, I had used the Canon EF 24-70, which is the older generation of glass from Canon. So coming soon to the channel will be that comparison video between the R and the R5 using the RF glass, and it will be images photographed in the studio that are not gel photography or gel lit. It's just standard studio lighting. So make sure to tune into the channel. If you have not subscribed to this channel, now might be a good time because that video will be coming very soon to this channel in the next few days. So moving on with part 3 today, once we've looked at those two images that are almost identical, then we're going to look at two separate images that are roughly in the same section of the shoot. And I want to look at those two images specifically for noise, but during the retouching process, mainly in frequency separation. That's a critical step during the retouching process, and I again want to see how the noise is being handled between these two camera bodies once we've processed the files in Adobe Camera Raw and then brought them into Photoshop and then took them into frequency separation. And speaking of retouching, the retouching series on this channel that I started several months ago is actually going to continue. Isn't that exciting? Yes, it's exciting to me. It should be exciting to you. So anyway, it's going to continue forward here in the next week or so. I finally have all the footage and all the elements and moving parts that I need to continue forward. Where we left off with the retouching series is how I retouch hair, how I add hair to images and so forth. So we're going to continue forward the retouching series very soon. Here's a quick sneak peek at what lays ahead for you in the retouching series on this channel. Finally, we'll be finishing the Gel Photography Series Part 3 today by taking a look at a full edit of an image from this session. We'll be talking about the major highlights of how I took the image from raw to final artwork and going over some of those different steps. So since I've been squawking my box for about 4 minutes now, let's go ahead and hit the Photoshops and begin this journey of Part 3, the edit. It's so incredibly douchey. First and foremost, to begin the journey today, this is my wonderful friend Danielle. You've seen her in the previous videos in this series, as well as other videos on the channel. She and I are wonderful friends. She's a great talent in front of the camera as well as behind it. So please go to the Instagram account at the link below. Give her a follow and give her some love on Instagram by liking some of her images. She's a great human being. I value our friendship, and you will not be disappointed with what you find on her Instagram portfolio. So here are the two images. This one is captured from the Canon EOS R5. This one is from the Canon EOS R. Let's look at the settings. I had to set the ISO to 4000. so that I could see in the LCD and the EVF what I saw. I trust was a good exposure to the image, and that was how high I had to take the ISO to get there. It's at a shutter speed of 1/160th of a second, and we're at that aperture of f8. f8 is just my preferred aperture for all of the portrait work that I do, or f11, because I love the amount of detail that we get into the image, and usually working with light, we can start getting some really soft light and some interesting lighting patterns. So to be able to get the camera to f8 and see a good exposed image, I had to take the ISO to 4000. Let's begin the journey of comparing the noise by looking at the R. Now we're zooming in on her face, and immediately the noise, it's there. This is not a thing of which camera body doesn't have noise. It's there, but it is not bad at all. I'm not seeing any major, like, strong artifacts within the noise, or those weird little elements that would jump out that would make you think there's like dust or something on the sensor. This looks pretty good, and looking at the skin, I think everything looks fine with this noise. So let's go ahead and zoom into the R5. Now the R5 is a 45 megapixel camera, so as you notice, we zoom in, we're zoomed in just a little bit further because there's so much more information to work with. And it's an interesting thing to consider, because we are considering right now noise. If there is more detail, more data, there's more detail, there's more opportunity for noise and artifacts with the R5 compared to the R. So zooming around to this image, the noise is there. It's not bad at all. I think it's being handled just fine. If we look into the shadows, I don't see any of those bizarre little artifacts, although I can start to see some, just a few little specks. If it's not coming through in the video here on YouTube, trust me, they're there, but they're not, again, any kind of major egregious artifacts. And that's what I'm looking for, because once you started taking the ISO up on previous Canon bodies, you would start seeing all these bizarre, like white, red, green, and blue, just bizarre little specks within the data, within the pixels, that are called artifacts. And that's how you can tell there are some issues with the noise. So I'm not opposed to this one at all. Let me zoom out just a touch so that I can kind of try to match the framing of where we were with the other one. So there's a little bit of a contrast difference I can see, and a little bit of color difference, but both of these cameras, by the way, for their image settings, I forgot what it's called in Canon cameras, but ultimately, like your picture settings, if you will, like you can go like studio and landscape or neutral. Both of these are on neutral, and they're using the same exact lens, the same cards, the same light, the same everything. So there is a noticeable color difference, I think, to a degree, where it's just a little bit more saturated and a little stronger there with the R5, which is what we're seeing on the screen right now, compared to the R. The R feels a little less saturated with color, and a touch brighter, I would say, as well. But that is not anything that, for me, it is not anything that I think, oh, I must now use an R5 because it looks better in the color or whatever else. These are minute little changes that can be made with the images themselves. Really, I was just concerned about that noise. So what I'm seeing right now, I don't think is that bad. Let's go ahead and push the exposure up by a full stop of power. So we're at +1 for the exposure on the R5. And let's go ahead and zoom in just a little bit more so we can start really exposing some of that noise, because shooting with these Illuminate full spectrum lights, we may need to add light to them in post-production at varying stages. And when we add light to it, we start pulling out the shadows and reevaluating the black point in the image. That's where the noise is really going to make itself known. So right now, again, I am seeing some of those little white specks that are indicative of artifacts, but these, to be fair to the R5, are in the shadows, in the deepest dark point of this image. So that does not surprise me that they're there, and I do not think that's a deal breaker at all. The noise does not look horrible. Some of this on her jacket could just be fuzz and so forth, so I'm not going to really analyze that. It's more here in these shadows on her neck. So let's go ahead and go to the R image, and we'll increase this by a full point of light. There we go. The noise is much more pronounced now. So I'm definitely seeing more of the noise. Is it worse looking than what it was a moment ago with the R at that 0 exposure adjustment? No, it is not worse looking, but I can definitely see more of it compared to the R5. As I speculated in part 2 of the series, the R5 is just simply going to handle the noise better. It's a newer processor than the R. It's using the Digic X or the 10. They haven't decided definitively what that is. At least I haven't heard about it. And it's not like Canon calls me every day to say, hey, here's an update of all of our stuff. The Digic X processor is a stronger processor than what's in the R. It's the Digic 8. The sensor is better, the processor is better, and so forth. Looking at this in the R5, that noise is pretty strong for sure. Let's do, an extreme zoom in here. So looking at the noise, again, I can see those little white specks and artifacts. Hopefully you all can see those on the YouTubes. That's indicative of potentially, yes, that could be like glitter or something in her hair. I doubt it. These are elements of the noise and the pixels just not being handled the right way. And that's okay. That's to be expected when you start going to a high ISO. But bouncing back and forth of these two images in these two sections. Definitely the R5 is handling it better, but the R is pretty close. And not... I'm sorry, I'm forming this opinion right now live to you. I'm going to be honest, I like the R5. I like what I see. The noise is there, it's an issue, but part of it too could be some of the darkening of the natural imagery that we see. So I'm going to pull the contrast down just a touch, and I'm going to increase the white point in the image just a little bit for the R5, trying to match what I see from that sense of neutrality of the R image. And I feel like the noise is being handled better in the R5 than the R. They are close to each other. They're not extremely close. They're close. So right now, do I want to make the leap from my R to purchase a $4,000 camera, which is the R5? Not at this second, simply because of the noise. But I'm being biased because I'm waiting for the new camera bodies that are being that are coming out in 2021 that Canon has rumored will come out in 2021. I want to see what those are before I make the leap forward. But I am liking what I see from the R5 more than the R, but the R is still okay to me. So let me know in the comments below what you think between these two comparisons right now of this noise, because the noise, I think, is being handled noticeably better with the R5 than the R, but I really want to know your opinions on this because, and I mean that not to just get you to comment on the videos, because yes, for the YouTube algorithms, if you all don't know this, if you like the video, you subscribe, you comment, that helps the algorithm on YouTube think that this is a good video for it to start showing to other people. It's no different than social media. If you start commenting on somebody's post, then the post is going to be seen by more people in social media because the Skynet's trying to feed it to people to get traction. I'm not asking you to comment on it because of that. Yes, it helps me. I want to know your thoughts, because even when people share comments on this channel that, being quite honest, annoy me and make me mad, I still learn something from it, begrudgingly, but I do. So let me know your thoughts, because I do enjoy reading through them and seeing what you all have to say. Right now, I'm going to go with the R5. I like the R5. I like what I see with the noise. And if I had to make a decision right now, either you're using the Canon EOS R or the R5 for the future of your gel photography, specifically when it relates to the Illuminate full spectrum lights, I would choose the R5 because it's just handling that noise just a touch better. So let's go ahead and take two new images into the retouching process of frequency separation and compare and contrast all of that data. Now keep in mind, these two new images that we're going to look at, I'm going to process them in Adobe Camera Raw in the same way with the exact same settings, because they were photographed roughly at the same time during the session, where the pose is almost identical, but there's a variation to it. The framing is a little bit different, but everything is pretty much the same. So I'm going to give them the exact same changes in ACR, then take them into Photoshop, prepare all the frequency separation layers. We'll be right back when we can look at those and see that crucial step of retouching and how the noise is being handled between these two camera bodies. Let's start the look at these images with the Canon EOS R image in frequency separation. Now, frequency separation for both of these is utilizing the median noise method. They were both set at the same threshold for median noise. If you're new to frequency separation and you've never experienced any of that before, take a look at the card above. It will take you to the retouching series, and specifically the frequency separation video, to show you how I do all of that with this. So I want to zoom in and take a look at the detail layer here on the Canon EOS R image and just kind of scroll around the process. And conversion looked fine. All the information looks fine. When I work on the detail layer in frequency separation for gel photography, I prefer not to leave the black and white adjustment layer on, because in the detail layer, you can simply have color in the detail and you could potentially start color contaminating other areas with different colors from the details themselves. Now the details are working through just fine using the clone stamp tool right now to remove any blemishes or distractions that we would see in the skin and in the noise itself. And I think it looks good right now. And let me say this real quick, because I meant to say this a moment ago. When we talk about noise in a camera, and specifically when you get into digital photo editing, you don't necessarily want to remove all of the noise, because the noise itself helps make the image feel like it's sharp and in focus. The noise is a part of the image as much as the color is a part of the image. So we can never fully remove all of the noise, but what we can do is let the algorithms in a program like Photoshop scale the noise down and reorganize that information. So when we start sharpening the image using texture or clarity or smart sharpen or the high pass filter in Photoshop, we're sharpening information that has been organized to the best of its ability by the digital photo editor. So again, looking at this noise, it's copying over just fine. I think everything is all right. It looks like she had a little bit of a hair that was crossing down from her. She has wonderful hair, and it was just crossing into her face. So I think all of this looks fine. And the noise is good. This is what I would expect from my Canon R. So now let's go into the R5 image and kind of zoom around in that black and white view. Noise looks pretty much the same, and the information is there. Let's go ahead and turn off the black and white adjustment layer. Wow. So I'm sorry, hands down, the R5, there's more information there. Which is to be expected. It's a 45 megapixel camera sensor compared to the R, which is 30 megapixels, and it's 2 generations newer. So I do like the noise here. It feels, I don't want to say sharper, and it feels more organized. It feels more, I'm sorry, the only word that's coming to head is artistic. Like, it feels like this is a stronger, bigger, beautiful looking image compared to the one that we just looked at, which is the R. And that hair crossed into her lips, so whatever. But wow, even the noise from another section is playing really well onto her lip, and that shouldn't happen. Oh my gosh, the noise, wow. I'm sorry, just bouncing back and forth. This noise in the R, through the process of taking both of these through ACR and then running them through the significant changes to the data here in this file by doing frequency separation. This, right now, looking at this, feels illustrated. It feels a little noisy. I'm sorry, words are failing me right now. This does not feel as strong and as professional looking as I would want to see in my artwork. Wow, as compared to that. Hands down, man. Hands down. Yes, there's some of that subtle color variation and light, even though they were both set on that portrait setting of neutral, and I gave them the exact same changes in Adobe Camera Raw and the process. And maybe this is an effect of that, because the colors, as we see the light in this image compared to this one, the light is stronger, and they had both of them had the same changes through ACR. So the light is less pronounced. And she's moved just a touch, so that's a part of it, because that blue teal light here that's off camera left is not quite getting as much play as we can see here. So you know what? Let me take that back. Being fair, this pose is letting some of that blue teal light come into play. It's coming up and through and illuminating this side of her face, whereas comparatively in this one, it isn't hitting. So we're getting a richer saturation of color because it's a deeper tone of a color, not as bright, and the pixels and everything is going to be altered by that. But as we zoom in, here's the simple way to put it. This feels like an old camera. This feels like a new camera. And I want that. Not because I have to have the new and the best, because I want this. Because this, when I look at this, I'm being honest, this makes me feel better about the imagery that I'm capturing. And the RF glass certainly has something to do with that as well. I had a comparison video on the channel not too long ago where I compared the EF to the RF. And you know what? TV timeout. Let me jump in here for all of you folks that are taking the time to comment on these videos, which I greatly appreciate. I'm aware of the listed differences in this gear. I hope that you hear me when I say in these videos, I'm trying to take one section of how we could compare and contrast gear, and usually that section of how we compare and contrast is being motivated by spending our dollars wisely. When I started my career many years ago, my wife and I didn't have 2 pennies to rub together, and we were trying to start a business. So dollars were incredibly important to us. And I made ridiculous mistakes in the past with gear because some jackbag would come along and tell me, you've got to have the best of the best, and you're using that crap. And I would spend money we didn't have on things that I found out very quickly I did not need the best of the best. Was it better? Yes, it was better than the thing that I purchased, but the thing that I purchased enabled me to go really far in photography and business, and I saved dollars that kept the lights on. So when I make these videos, it isn't about saying, oh my gosh, never use the Canon EOS R, it's terrible, use the R5. No, I'm looking at it from a perspective of what is that gear going to do for you? Because there are people out there right now that are better artists and photographers than me, than the most popular people in our industry, and they're using APS-C cameras. So gear makes a difference, absolutely, but it is not the gateway and threshold to our artwork. Remember that. So looking at this, at the frequency separation step, I'm going to wait until the new bodies, the rumored bodies from Canon are announced, because one of them apparently is going to be a megapixel sensor size of like 75 to 96 to 10 billion. And I want to see what that is. And I want to see if the R5 goes down in price. I also want to see more firmware updates to the R5, because one of the biggest reasons I was drawn to that camera was the video options, so that I can continue to do new ideas for this channel that I've had for a very long time, but I need 120 frames a second at 60 frames, or 120 frames a second at full HD and potentially 4K. So I will switch to the R5. Because I'm liking what I see too much here with this. And I think it's fair to say that if the data and the noise and the pixels are being handled this well with the R5 in gels, they certainly will be handled well with just typical studio portrait lighting. So that is, again, why I'm doing that comparison video that's coming in a few days to the channel. So again, if you have not subscribed, this is a good time to do it, because I really want to see those images that I captured with Danielle that are basic studio lighting and how the data is being handled between the R5 and the R, specifically using the RF 24-70 f2.8 from Canon. So wow. All right, so let's go ahead and finish up part 3 today with taking a look at the major highlights of a full edit. I'm going to take the time to go through everything with you of what I did to get it to that final artwork. So give me just a minute, we'll be right back and we'll look at that art. So let's go ahead and finish part 3 with the retouch itself. Now I just decided to make a change in my head based upon all this information. I want to offer all of you the opportunity to see the full retouch. So if you want to see the retouch processing the image in ACR, frequency separation, dodging, and burning a little bit of a color grade, then just continue watching. If you don't want to see all of that and you just want to hear the cliff notes of what happened, then go ahead and skip to the final little chapter here at the end of the video, and I'll give you that recap of everything that we did and show you a couple of things, then conclude the video for today. So let's go forward with this. Just give me a second to open that file into ACR if you want to watch the full retouch, and we'll be right back. Okay, so let's get started with the retouch here. Now I'm just going to cover a couple of basic things that I've talked about in the retouching series. I'm working with a color space of Adobe RGB 1998. This is a 16-bit image. I want it to be a 16-bit image so we get access to all of the colors that are available, or as much as we can process with this image itself. So let's start. Foundations for retouching in Photoshop. I always talk about this in different videos. My foundations are color, luminosity, and detail. Those 3 things combined is the signal and the gateway for every single step of what you do in Photoshop. So First thing I'm looking at is luminosity, because obviously light plays a huge issue into this, and then color, and then we'll work with detail. So I'm going to start by coming down to the optics tab and clicking both of these buttons, which is going to remove the chromatic aberrations of the image, and then also use profile corrections. This is going to help overcome the distortion of the lens, the RF lens from Canon. This is also the R5 image from the series, not an R image. So I'm going to pull the shadows out just a little bit, and when you pull shadows out into an image that has high ISO, this is where you're going to start revealing a lot of noise. So you may take it all the way to 100 and think, wow, I like that, that looks really illustrated, but zoom in and see how horrible the noise looks right now. But you know, since we're here in ACR and you're following along with this part of the process, thanks for doing it, by the way, let's go ahead and come down to the detail tab, and we're going to start using ACR to remove the noise. And I'm going to take it to, usually I take it to about a threshold of 25. Wow. So the noise is still very prominent, but it's being pulled out pretty significantly. Let's go up to 30. And I just said this, you don't want to remove all of the noise. Let's take a look. I mean, if you remove all the noise in this image and take it all the way out, you get a super blurred out image. This is similar to the median process when you do frequency separation, when you're separating the color and the detail into their own layers. So you don't want to go too far with this, but if we go to like 35, we're pulling some of that noise out, we're getting a good play into the space. I don't feel like it's making the image feel out of focus, and is what will happen if you remove the noise too far. Also, let me jump in real quick for the folks that want to leave some comments. I know that there are other third-party programs that do a good job of removing noise and images. Part of my goal on this channel is to show folks how to utilize the software that they do have, which is Photoshop. So I'm choosing to use the noise reduction here in ACR to remove that noise. Now, to compensate for the noise and the potential lack of sharpness, quote unquote, I'm coming back to the basic tab and I'm going to increase the texture slider. That's usually my first go-to when I want to, quote unquote, sharpen up the image. We can go ahead and give it a touch of clarity as well. I'm not a fan of clarity in normal portrait work, but in gels I am, because it starts to increase the overall luminosity values and thus the color in the image when we start increasing the clarity. It's like giving it that HDR feel, and I'm not a fan of HDR because it typically makes the image feel dirty because it increases the noise in the image too much. But in this case, since we just decrease the actual noise, maybe we need a little help from it with clarity. So I'm hitting Controller Command on the number 0 to zoom all the way back out. Yeah, from this distance, I think it looks fine. As I zoom in, there's still a little too much noise that I can see over here that I'm just not a fan of, but I'm willing to accept that because I know that I pushed the camera further than I typically would. And just to share some of my artistic thoughts here, if this is how I'm going to go forward with gels, using the full spectrum lights from Luminate and potentially using a camera like the Canon EOS R5, I'm going to have to accept that there's going to be changes to the visual output of my work from what I used to do in the past using traditional strobes and light modifiers. And I'm very tempted to do a comparison video between the same model, same clothes, same lighting color choice, but use strobes and light modifiers, then use the Luminate full spectrum lights and see which one you all like better. So if that's something that you're interested in seeing, let me know in the comments below. And for all the other folks that skipped ahead, they won't know what we're secretly talking about. All right, so let's go forward. I'm going to increase the white point in the image, which is traditionally going to give us a boost to the overall light that we see. Let's zoom back out because Danielle's staring at me and it's creepy. All right, here we go. Let's push the white point just a bit more. Wow, the R5 is handling that information really well. I'm going to stop saying stuff about the R5. I'm going to take the black point down. Typically, I would take it out because I'm preparing the image for Photoshop. And if I take it out, it will start to make the image feel a little bit brighter. And that's ultimately where I need to fight to get light into these. But in the same thing that I just said a moment ago, when you start taking the black point out of an image that has a lot of noise into it, you're going to reveal that noise. So let's look at her shirt. Like, we're seeing all of this noise being revealed here, especially in the shadows here, where her left arm is casting a shadow onto her body. If I take that black point back to 0, the noise is minimized. And I don't want to go too much further with noise reduction right now, whether I was using Photoshop or a third-party program like some from Topaz Labs. I don't want to do that. I'm just going to take it to a place where I feel comfortable. As a matter of fact, I'm actually going to take it down, because the point with removing the black point and reassessing all the data is we get more light into the image we don't need it. I think it looks fine the way it is. As a matter of fact, we could just boost the exposure just a touch. Okay, so I'm going to keep that black point where it is. Let's give the saturation just a little bit of a boost overall. Now I'm going to come down to the color mixer and I'm going to start choosing the actual colors that are in the scene, potentially increasing the saturation of it, the luminance of it, or shifting the hue just a touch. So let's start with purple, and I take the saturation down just to see that purple is the predominant color here in this scene, even though I was trying to shoot for more of a magenta. So I can increase the saturation, and I can shift the hue to start getting it more to that purple blue, or start getting it closer to that magenta, which is what I wanted. So I'm at +8 right now for the hue shift on purples, and I'm at +4 for saturation. Now, when you do this step, you don't want to go too far in gel photography retouching, because the more that you increase the saturation, you're going to start increasing the banding that happens between one color to the other. This is information that's there that's being pushed too far from what was captured with the camera, and you'll start getting these bizarre patterns that makes it look like she has a skin condition. So you don't want to go too far when you push the overall saturation of either globally of all the saturation of the colors or one specific color. So let's pull it back to like 6. Yeah, I like that. Let's step out just a few. I'm hitting Control Command and the minus key, which is taking me a few steps backward. Let's go to the blues, increase the blues. You know, they're definitely in there a lot. I like what I see, but see, there's that banding again. So that banding is pretty bad, and we increase the saturation too much. So I'm going to start pushing it till I see it, and I see it a little too much, and then back it off. So I'm at now +30. Keep in mind, I could do that with the blue because the blue was not as prominent of a color in the scene as magenta purple was. So I couldn't push the magenta purples too far. Here's the actual magenta slider. If we take it all the way out and in, you can see that there wasn't that much magenta in the image, even though that's the color that I chose on the color wheel with the full spectrum lights from Luminate. So if I push these too far, I'm seeing that banding up here on her socket of her shoulder. So I'm just going to pull it down actually just a little bit. Let me look at her face just to make sure that I'm not like removing it too much. See, so it's in her eyes. If I take it too far, we get that weird look. So I'm going to leave magenta alone. Just leave it alone, David. Leave it alone. So I'm going to leave it alone. All right, Control Command and the 0 key to zoom all the way back out. And let's go back to the basic tab. I think everything is fine there. There's not really much else that I want to change. I'm not going to deal with color grading or anything else because we'll do that at a later time. So I'm going to go ahead and I have to think because I'm doing this live. I'm actually going to open this as a smart object. And to do that, I held the Shift key down and then went down to the Open dialog in Adobe Camera Raw. That will open this as a smart object so that I can come up to the top layer, right click where there's no words or the thumbnails, and come down to New Smart Object via Copy. New Smart Object via Copy is making a separate smart object, so it is not tied to the original one, so that I can take this top one back into ACR and make some changes. When I hit OK and open it back into Photoshop, this layer will be different than this one. If you just simply duplicate a smart object in Photoshop, when they are raw files, they are tied together. So if you make a change to one, both of them will be changed at the same time. New Smart Object via Copy. It's confusing. Hopefully Adobe one day will change the terminology of all of that so that we don't have that problem. I'm making this second copy and coming back in because I want to pull the highlights down significantly. I love my new wall in my studio. I just don't need the highlights where they were right now. That's a big hot spot. There's some hot spots over here. Yes, it pulls out the texture of the wall, but that's potentially fighting focus, where the audience is going to go to the pretty wall and not the model. So I'm going to pull the highlights down significantly and then hit OK. It's going to process that raw file now so that we can put a black mask or a hide all mask onto this layer so that we can paint it in where we want it to be. So to put that black mask onto it, I'm going to hold Alt or Option and come down to the layer mask icon here at the bottom of the layer window and click it, and that puts that black mask onto it. Now, using my Wacom Intuos Pro tablet and pen, I'm going to start painting white onto this mask, which will begin to reveal this actual layer, changing the flow of my brush to 10% because I want to do this very minimally and just start painting it in. The Wacom pen tablets are amazing. They have pressure sensitivity built into them. So the lighter I touch the pen to my tablet, the lighter that it's interacting with the image in Photoshop. And that's key because I want to be able to build up effects and do things subtly. Subtlety is key inside of Photoshop. I say that all the time on this channel. Now, I'm over painting into Danielle's actual body, and I don't want that, but part of my preference when I paint in anything that I do in Photoshop, I just want to get it all down. I want to get it onto the canvas and then go back and undo what I did. So I'm switching my foreground color back to black, changing my flow to 100%, and then just simply undoing that mask right where that highlight was on her arm, so that we can get all that good light coming back into the scene here. Okay, good. Hitting Control or Command and the number 0 to zoom all the way back out. I'm going to flatten both of these. This is working destructively, which means that once I flatten it and go a few steps forward in my history, I will not be able to go back to this step. So before I go forward, I want to make sure I don't need these two raw files anymore. I don't. I can go ahead and compress them down into one layer by flattening it. Now, I hit a hotkey on my keyboard to do that. I'm going to hit Control or Command and the letter Z to move back one step in my history. If you want to flatten, just simply come up to Layer and down to Flatten Image. You can see here that I have assigned the F4 key as a hotkey to this function because I do it all the time. Now, before we go into frequency separation, I like to clean up the image of anything that needs to go away, especially on the floor of the studio. So, sorry, my mouse went off the screen there. So I'm hitting J for the healing brush, and I'm on the spot healing brush tool, and this is set to content aware. So the spot healing brush is going to look for the surrounding areas of whatever I paint and say, okay, let's make up something new by borrowing the data from everywhere else and copying it over these little things on my studio floor that I don't want to be in this scene. I'm not going to worry about getting rid of the light stands and so forth. They're framed up into the shot, but I'll get rid of that little foot of the other light stand. There we go. And just getting rid of these, it just saves me a little bit of time so I don't have to do it during the frequency separation point. Now, some people will use the healing brush or the spot healing brush during frequency separation, or to prepare for frequency separation on the actual skin. They'll come up and zoom in and look for anything that needs to be removed as a blemish using the spot healing brush or the healing brush tool. I don't like doing that because it will start to potentially introduce random patterns within the noise as artifacts that can become a blemish itself if you're not careful. In gel retouching, it's not that noticeable. It's not that big of a deal. So again, hitting J for the spot healing brush, if I were to paint a line right there. But as you can see, let's zoom in, and hopefully you can see this in the video. I'm going back one step, so that's what was the texture in the skin. This is what is. Now there's recognizable patterns here of details there and there and there, because the spot healing brush and the healing brush are an algorithm by Adobe Sensei that is trying to make up something new based upon where you're painting. This is causing an issue, and it's not a fault of the program. It's just a human being. You have to drive. The computer can't do it for you right now. So I'm going to go one step back in my history. I'm going to go ahead and run my Retouch 3.0 action, which will populate all the layers for frequency separation, dodging and burning, and the layers that I would use to enhance the eyes. Ooh, that's way too much. Let's go to 6. Let's go to 5. 5's better. Hit OK. If you're not familiar with this action or don't know what it's about, take a look at the card above. It will take you to the video on this channel that in the description for that video is a link to the Google Drive to download the action for free. So you can utilize the same action that I'm using. And in that video, it shows you how to use the action itself and all the layers and so forth, as well as the retouching series. So I'm not going to go through every single step of frequency separation for you today. I'm just going to talk through what I do as I do it. So please look at the retouching series in that video if you want a further explanation of what everything does. Using the clone stamp tool, I'm copying over details and artifacts on the detail layer in frequency separation that I choose. So I'm not letting Skynet try to do it for me. And that's what I mean when I say the humans got to do the thinking. You can't always use automation. And this is going to become more and more of a thing as we continue to move forward in our digital photographic editing lives, because more and more companies are trying to create AI that just does everything for you. And AI is getting better and better every day, and we're getting closer and closer to Terminator showing up to our front door asking for John Connor. But what I'm also seeing is that these companies, They have a vested interest to invest in AI software because there are so many people that are coming into the realm of photography and in digital photo editing, which I think is a great thing. I think everybody should photograph. Everybody should create artwork. Our world, I think, would be a lot better if people did. The problem is, and I mean this with all due respect, the problem is people don't want to take the time to learn why things work in Photoshop. They don't want to take the time to do their own artwork. And I can understand that to a certain degree. But people also tell me all the time, and I'm not trying to be arrogant or facetious here. People tell me, I love your work, I love your work. And I tell them and I want to be like you. I want to do what you can do. And it makes me feel wonderful as an artist and as a human being. But when I tell them to be able to do what I do, you got to practice every single day. When I listen to a pianist perform some of my favorite music, I don't run up to them and tell them, oh my gosh, I wish I could do what you do, because I know that that's a statement of saying I never took the time to commit to actually practicing and learning it. I'm not trying to dog you. I'm not trying to be mean to you. But the more that we keep embracing AI, the further the artist is being removed from the artwork. And for me, I'm not okay with that for myself and my artwork. If that's something that you need to do because you're that busy in your business photographing, so you need to outsource the work. Hey, I do freelance retouching for photographers all the time. It's a great revenue stream for me. So I'm not saying, ooh, bad, never have other people edit your images. I'm just saying that either have people edit your images or don't run out and buy the next latest AI software that's like, you don't even have to think, just hit the button and it'll make pretty artwork for you. No, don't, because I guarantee you what it makes will never, ever come close to what you are able to produce with your own mind. So please, I feel like I'm yelling at people. It's because I'm hungry. So I'm starting to get hangry. Please take the time to learn why things work in Photoshop. Please take one day out of every week and spend an hour, just an hour, studying frequency separation or dodging and burning, studying color theory. Learning how to edit your own artwork can be one of the greatest journeys that you go on as an artist. And I know that because I've went on it, and it's one that I am so incredibly thankful that I did. And I am thankful for the opportunities that I have in my career and in my life. Okay, I don't need to police her pants that much for this. You get the point of what I would do with all of that detail. Now, here's the next crucial step in editing for frequency separation of any image, but especially for gels. I'm going to start using the mixer brush on the color layer to start smoothing out all the transitions of color. Now, this is applicable for normal studio portrait work where you would look at the color variations of normal human skin tones and try to blend those out. With gels, this is doubly so because we're seeing a transition perimeter between this teal, blue, cyan into magentas, purples, and reds. This perimeter, this boundary right here, I want to smooth this out. And at the same time, I will be smoothing out potentially any of the variations in her skin tone that we saw that can cause variations of the colors from the gels. We smooth all of this. It gives the illusion that we have all of this beautiful smooth color to work with. And using the mixer brush on this step is an integral tool to this process. Again, if you're new to frequency separation, you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm not always this bossy or this Oprah or soapbox, but welcome. Again, look at those cards, look at those other videos in the retouching series because it will go into great detail about these steps. And these steps are absolutely crucial in the retouching process and in creating your own artwork. For folks that there's always somebody that gets wowed when they see the screen rolled, same as myself long ago when it happened for me the very first time. I'm simply hitting the R key because I paint better left to right instead of up and down. So I hit the R key and I can rotate the screen, and then when I'm done and I want the image to go back to its normal orientation, just hit the escape key and it will bounce back to where you need it to be. So when I look at these colors that I want to smooth with the mixer brush, again, I paint better left to right. There's a little bit of deodorant on her shirt that happened when she took the jacket off during the shoot, so we're just going to smooth that out, and I'm painting left to right now so I don't have to worry about rotating the screen. But if I want to smooth out this transition of color on her leg, I'm just rotating the screen so that I can get those smooth transitions there. and paint some color into these shadows so that the shadows in the clothing potentially don't pull any focus. And we're just going to focus on her and stay with her. So hitting escape to come all the way back out in the normal orientation of the image, using the mixer brush in that step. I think everything looks fine. I could do some actual, oh, whoops, you know what? I want to come back up to her chin, my bad. I saw this a moment ago and I forgot to get to this. So there's some banding right through here. Let me hit the V for the move tool so I can get that little arrow. There's banding right here that I was talking about that we saw in her arm. And I want to smooth this out so we have the illusion that everything is just smooth, happy, Bob Ross copacetic colors in this image. So I'm going to hit right through here. Did I even hit her face with this? No, I don't think I did. So blending these colors just a little bit to get it all nice and smooth as far as color transition is concerned. There we go. Let's go ahead and come to the blank layer here in the layer stack that is between the detail layer but above the color layer. When I start painting on this with the basic traditional brush, I'm going to change my flow, my brush to 5%, sample, I'm going to sample this tone right here by hitting Alter Option. When I'm on the basic brush, you hit Alter Option, it will default to the eyedropper tool so you can sample the existing color that's there. Then I'm going to paint at 5% and just paint out some of these gentle shadows here that are creases in her skin as she turned her head in that awkward position that I asked her to do. There we go. I'm going to change the flow of my brush to 1% when I do a lot of painting and I want to feather out the colors and just make those transitions not look like I was painting. I will change the flow of my brush to 1% and we just smooth out those shadows. Zooming in just a little bit, let's look at the before and after. See all those shadows before and after. Painting with the basic brush, whether it's gel photography, normal portrait retouching, will save your life. It will save you so much time with issues. I was working with a dear friend of mine just recently, Josie, looking at one of her images, and there were a bunch of cars and stuff in the background in a very shallow depth of field. They were out of focus, but they were there, and it was potentially pulling focus from the subject in her image. And she told me that she used content-aware fill and scale and clone stamps and all this different stuff, and I just did frequency separation, sampled some of the color of the road, and simply painted out the cars within 2 minutes. So it's a wonderful step to take. Always try to rely upon painting when you can. So let's come up to the dodge and burn. I always start with the burn because I like creating the shadows. I'm going to change the flow of my brush to 10%. We need to paint with white onto this layer mask to begin to reveal the curves adjustment layer that's been set for the burn. And I'm painting in all the areas, not only where I see some shadows, but I also like to use dodging and burning as almost an illustrative tool, as an illustrator would do, whether they're doing illustration as artwork. I often think of comic books. I grew up drawing. I loved to draw. I would draw all the time and make my own pictures of Superman and the Transformers and so forth. And I learned that using black ink lines, you can ink out the actual perimeter of everything and it helps draw the focus. So I'm doing the same thing here by using dodging and burning to a degree. I want to get that outer perimeter edge defined almost like I'm inking it in certain key areas like her lip and the bottom of her nose, darkening up her eyelashes and so forth. Part of this is to use the global dodge and burn as it's meant to be used, which is to accentuate and add artificial highlight and shadow to help create 3D in the image. I'm also using it like a cartoonist would use to help ink into the image and define all of those elements that we need to see. Now, this is a curves adjustment layer that's dealing with just pure luminosity information of black, white, and gray. So it's not going to contaminate any of the colors that we see here. So I'm not worried. I can leave the black and white adjustment layer on that's on right now because I'm not affecting any of the color as far as altering the hue or the tone of the color. It is definitely altering the luminosity value of the color. It's really just contrasting it and helping it to stand out just a little bit more. Okay, let's go to the dodge and repeat what we just did. Dodge and burn, highlight and shadow. You want corresponding highlights to the places where you just put in shadows. It's the same thing when people apply makeup. If you're applying makeup, you want a corresponding highlights to your shadows. That's how you contour. That's how you define. So I'm just hitting some of these key areas again to make it feel like it's got that illustrative quality to it. Okay, zooming back out by hitting Control or Command and the minus key. hitting some key areas that I always like to dodge and burn. Females, yes, let's go straight to it. I added shadows underneath her breasts. I'm adding highlights on top of it so that they're accentuated in the image. I know specifically she likes being a female and she doesn't mind that we're accentuating that part of her body in these images. And that's not a value judgment or statement. I just am addressing that, so in case anybody feels uncomfortable or wants to challenge it, I want you to understand my position before we have a discussion about it. And I love having discussions. I think soapbox, Oprah moment, some of the troubles we're facing in our world is because we don't talk to each other anymore. We just make little 60-second soundbite value judgments. Let's not do that. Let's talk. So if you want to talk to me about beauty standards in the industry and so forth, I would love to talk about it, as long as we do it respectfully and we listen to one another. We don't necessarily have to change each other's minds and opinions, but my gosh, if we listen to one another, you know what's going to happen? We're going to learn, and that is going to make a huge difference in our world. My goodness. David does not need to record YouTube videos when he's hangry, because you all are getting all kinds of lessons today. Oh, I got to change my legs. Oh, I was sitting on my leg too long the wrong way. My poor body's like, don't sit on your leg, fatso. I can't feel it anymore. Circulation. I don't want to die. Moving on, we're going to go to the color highlights curves adjustment layer here. Now, I love this one, and this is in my action. So again, look at the card, go to the video, go to the description, download the action, you'll have it. I love this one for gel portrait retouching because it is simply set to a blending mode of hard light. And the curve has been pushed up a lot, and that is going to accentuate light and color really well, really quickly. So I'm going to change the flow of my brush to 5% from 10%, and I'm just going to use it to hit key areas to pull out details like the lips, her nose, her chin, up here in her eyes, and it works really well to give us some interesting stuff here to look at. Let's go ahead and hit her arm, just a brief touch here. Now it's making some of these colors a little bit brighter, but when we get to things like clothing, it's going to really saturate those colors and those highlights and give us some really fun looks. But it's not pulling focus, because it's not adding to the light. It's not adding to the shadow. It's just giving it a variation of what already exists, and that's due to this blending mode of hard light. So hard light is a wonderful blending mode that I work with all the time. Let's look at this wall. As I paint it, we're getting some interesting, more further detail, but notice how it's becoming saturated with colors. And the black point and the white point, it's not making it brighter or darker. So it shouldn't be pulling focus because it's just saturating it. Now that I've painted it in, this calls back to what I said a moment ago. I like to get it all in and then start removing just a little bit when I paint. So I'm switching my foreground color to black. I'm changing the flow of my brush to 3%. It was previously at 5%. Now I'm going to start painting black, which is technically undoing what I just did on that wall. And I'm doing it globally just to kind of smooth it all out. I paint a lot in, I feather it by taking it away a little bit so that we don't have strong pulls of information all the time in certain areas. Now, the last step in these layers here would be to go to the category for eyes and start enhancing the eyes. But since she's wearing the glasses and so forth, it's not really that necessary. And this is the overall view of the image itself. So I don't need to retouch her eyes. So we've addressed color, we've addressed luminosity and detail. In the confines of frequency separation, let's go ahead. I'm going to make a new layer at the very top of all of this, which is called a composite layer of everything. I'm going to do this by hitting Control, Alt, Shift, and E for everything, or Command, Option, Shift, and E on a Macintosh. Now, nothing happened because I had selected this folder here that says eyes, but it's not turned on. So I need to come to the topmost layer that is active and turned on if I want that to be included in this composite layer that we're making. So again, Control, Alt, Shift, and E for everything, Command, Option, Shift, and E on a Mac. So now I have this new layer that's a composite of everything. I can close down these little groups and I can work on this one. Going back to color, luminosity, and detail, we're now talking about the color grade. What do I want to do with all of this? Well, the first thing that I want to do is to say that I already like the light just as it is, and I already like the color just as it is. The only thing I need to do now is to add some detail to it. And one of my favorite ways to add detail to gel images to further accentuate that feeling of illustration is to use the high pass filter. So to do that, I'm going to duplicate this layer by hitting Control or Command and the letter J for duplicate. And then I'm going to come up to filter. That's a little joke to Adobe because J and duplicate Shouldn't it be Control D, but that's something completely different. It's deselect, so I get it. Whatever. I'm going to come down to, from filter, come down to other, and then come down to high pass. High pass is a wonderful way to add details to the image, to sharpen it up, but it is something that can go too far too quickly, specifically in the realm of haloing. So if you look at this image right now, see all of this weird green as a halo around her finger. This is haloing in the image. So we're going to start seeing this cascading weird outer glow, if you will. In the gels, it's going to be some bizarre, odd color. If you're in normal studio portrait lighting, you're going to see a darkened halo around the subject. That's because we're pushing the details too far with high pass. So at a radius of 6, this is a little too high. I'm going to bring it down to like 2. The halo is much more minimal, but it's still there. I don't mind it being there too much in the gels, but for studio portrait work, I don't want it there at all. Let's go to 3. 3 is pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now, this layer, as you can see, we zoom in, we can still see all the details here. They're being brought out in that high pass effect. We need to change the blending mode of this to let it interact with the layer beneath it to pull out those details, but still be able to see everything inside of the colors and the luminosity and everything that we have in this bottom layer. How do we do that? Well, in a previous video on the channel, I talked about blending modes in Photoshop and how they work. And in the subset here under overlay, these work by telling Photoshop to ignore the color 50% gray. And then it uses any colors, any information below 50% gray and above 50% gray to start working with the image to color grade it, essentially. So by choosing overlay, it's ignoring all of the gray of that image. And if we notice, there's a lot of gray in this high pass layer. It's being ignored now by Photoshop, which is letting us just see all of those strong colors around the perimeter. Go back up to it real quick. Look it through here. Thinking about it from like a comic book, cartoonist, an illustrator, these are the outer perimeter lines that we can see that defines the shape of her mouth. This interior line that's darker, it defines the interior of her mouth, her teeth. We see these lines without having to see the real colors and understand this is a human face. If we ignore all the gray that's in this layer, it lets all of these fine little colors that we see, all those greens and reds and weird colors in those areas, it lets them stand out and interact with the layer below so that they're being called out in a way that's sharpening everything. And part of it is truly sharpening all the pixels inside, but it's also illustrating those edges and making them stand out. And that's part of the beauty of using high pass. Now, soft light is the most, for lack of a better word, soft version of using high pass. Hard light, vivid light, linear light, these are the typical ones you would see when you use high pass and how it needs to interact in the blending mode. But these are also the hardest in how it's going to interact. I don't want it to be that hard, so I'm going to go to overlay. Overlay is a nice, happy compromise between something like linear light, hard light, and soft light, which is the softest. So Control Command and the number 0 to zoom all the way back out. It's not too noticeable from that big view, but as we come in and do it before and after, we can definitely see how much it's bringing out all of that information. And this is one where we need to think about the noise originally in the image, because we know we had a lot of noise. We reduced it with the detail slider in Adobe Camera Raw, but we tried to bring back some information with the texture slider in Clarity. We use high pass, we're bringing back information even more. If there's a lot of noise in the image that we left, that could be a problem. So at this stage, I don't think it is. I think it's totally fine. I'm gonna hit Control Command, the number 0 to zoom all the way back out. And what I wanna do is I'm gonna move these 2 layers to the very top here, because when we get to the end of the video, for the folks who didn't stay for the journey, so thank you all for staying for the journey. When we get to the end, I'll have to reference these, and I don't want them to see them in between the group of eyes and be like, wait a minute, he didn't tell me he was doing magic. So at the very top here, I wanna make a new composite layer of everything again. So I'm gonna hit Control, Alt, Shift, and E for everything. Command, Option, Shift, and E on a Mac. And then I'm going to take this one into Adobe Camera Raw to finalize everything. So I'm going to hit Control, Shift, and A, or Command, Shift, and A on a Mac, and that will reopen Adobe Camera Raw as a filter. If you are new to Photoshop and you're coming from Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw is literally the develop module in Lightroom. They are exactly the same. So in this regard, if you want to start using Photoshop, let Adobe Camera Raw be that bridge for you. So as you're learning Photoshop, you can call back to ACR at any time as a filter, and you get access to all these controls to start editing the image. So in this case, I want to finalize everything with some tools that are very specific to ACR or easier to use in ACR than their counterparts in Photoshop. So I'm going to increase the white point, which is going to start saturating everything with a little bit more color and making those colors stand out and that white point stand out. I'm going to pull the blacks down yet again, which is going to start increasing some of that overall contrast. Now before, when we were processing the raw file, it was also making the banding of that color really rough. But as we can see here, not so much anymore because we did frequency separation. We used the mixer brush to smooth out those transitions from one color area of magenta, pink, purple into the blues and teals and cyans that we see here. So we can push things now just a little bit further because we did the retouch. I'm going to go ahead and increase the highlights a little bit. I got to zoom back out so I can see the whole thing. And let's pull them down. Let's pull them out. Let's leave them. I'm going to pull them down just a touch. We're at -7 and I like that. I'm going to go ahead and increase the overall contrast in the image. I think that looks good. I'm not going to touch texture or clarity. We've done enough sharpening to the image with the high pass filter. I am going to give it a touch of dehaze. Dehaze was meant to remove the haze in an image, but it also really does a wonderful job of increasing the contrast in the colors. It can go too far too quickly, so just be careful on what you do with all of that. But I like this at this stage. I think that looks fine. We've got some good saturation of color. It all looks good, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And it's going to take us back into Photoshop. So the last little thing that I want to do here is a color grading step that I typically do in all of my work, regardless of the genre, and that's to add a solid color adjustment layer to the top of everything. It's a way to kind of unify the entire image with something, and whether it be a composite or just typical portraiture, it's something that I like to do. So I'm going to choose a color that's like a little bit of a deeper maroon, purple, magenta. Here at the top of the layer stack, I'm going to change the blending mode to lighten, and it gives it instantaneously a really nice stylized effect to the image. This is obviously too heavy-handed. I need to scale it back just a little bit, but to do that, I'm going to go ahead and pull the opacity down. I'm going to keep coming down with it. I'm at like 30 right now. Let's do before and after. It's just a little step that fills everything with just a little bit of color. I like that. Let's go ahead and add one more. We're going to do another solid color. Let's go into the blue teals and that deep that we were working with it. Let's go ahead and try darken. And let's bring the opacity down. I think that's too much. Let's bring the fill down too. We'll just get a hint of it. I'm going to change it from darken to soft light. And soft light is a little less heavy-handed, so I can bring the opacity and the fill back up. Yeah, I like that. We're playing around with those colors. I dig that. And let's put these two together into a group just so you can see the proper before and after. Here's the before and the after. Before and after. These two solid color adjustment layers, one on a blending mode of soft light, one on a blending mode of lighten. We're using magenta, the darker magenta, to lighten everything and make it a little bit brighter, especially in the shadows. And then we're using this teal as a soft light so that it's illuminating everything softly. And it's a way to take two simple adjustment layers that are very common to Photoshop, but globally making a change, which is what color grading is all about. And we make a change to everything in the image. Why is that important? Why am I specifying that? Because go back to the foundation, color, luminosity, and detail. We are making a global change to all three of those critical elements in this image. And when you make a global change to it, it brings cohesion into the image. It makes it feel like you as the artist are bringing everything together to produce the final artwork itself. So now let's go ahead and skip ahead into the final section of this video for those folks who didn't want to wait, like all of you, to see all of this. So if you're jumping in now, this is the TLDR version of everything that we just did. All my peeps, my crew that's been with me for the past however long, I dropped some major knowledge on them. major knowledge in the Photoshops and the Oprah on how to be a better human being. It was great. And we've also found out that I'm hangry and I can't record YouTube content when I'm hangry. So let's finish up this part and this section of the video in part 3 today. So looking at where we started with our base layer here that we processed in Adobe Camera Raw. From the Adobe Camera Raw section, we looked at the foundation of Photoshop, which is color, luminosity, and detail. So I went through making some adjustments, moving different sliders in ACR to get that prepared. The next section here is the frequency separation group. In the frequency separation group, what we want to do is to use things like the mixer brush to smooth out transitions of color between highlight and shadow so that we can smooth out everything, so we give the illusion that all the colors are soft. Of course, we use the detail layer here to get rid of any blemishes or anything like that that would stand out within the image. And then we also used this blank layer here to paint out some shadows that we see on the neck there so that we can just not have some of those distractions in certain key areas. And then moving on in the retouch step, we then did dodging and burning. Dodging and burning is a very key important step for a lot of different reasons. Part of it is a global dodge and burn where we're adding artificial highlight and shadow to the image to create a sense of three-dimensionality in the image. But we are also using dodging and burning, specifically burning, like an illustrator would or a cartoonist. If they're drawing a comic book, they're using dark lines to ink in the outer perimeter of the character. And this is how we understand and define the shapes that we're looking at, as well as color and light and so forth. So using dodging and burning from those two perspectives of global dodge and burn to create three-dimensionality, and also to use it like an illustrator would to ink in the image. Those are the key steps there. Then once we completed all that, we made a composite layer of everything so that we could duplicate it and then do a high pass filter onto it. This high pass filter is meant to sharpen the entire image. Here's the before, here's the after. I liked everything that was in the image already from color and luminosity's perspectives, but I also wanted to add some detail with that high pass. This high pass layer is on a blending mode of overlay. And again, that illustrative element is coming into play. If we can see now on the outer perimeter of her lip, the high pass is accentuating the colors and the details here around the entire perimeter, her teeth inside the lip. It's helping us to understand what we see in the image and give it that illustrative effect. Once that was done, we made another composite layer of everything that includes now that high pass filter, and then took that into Adobe Camera Raw as a filter, which you can use at any point in your work in Photoshop. You can go to Adobe Camera Raw as a filter to get access to all those controls. Some of those controls in there are also in Photoshop, but they're a little bit easier to use in ACR than the native program of Photoshop. So we did things like, again, looking at color, luminosity, and detail, and making some final little adjustments to the image from that perspective. Then the last thing that we did is add 2 solid color adjustment layers at the top of all of this, one on the blending mode of soft light, one on the blending mode of lighten. These 2 elements globally tied everything together into the final piece of artwork, and it gave us a beautiful image to look at, if I do say so myself. So let's finish up this video with some final thoughts today. The gel retouching series, all of this was meant to give you a glimpse into my work as an artist in gels and to show you one critical thing that is always evolving. I love using my strobes. I love using my light modifiers and the gel material that I use to be able to create these images that I've created in the past. And I'm very pleased with this work. I could stay with this technique, these tools, this gear. I could stay with it and continue to make artwork, but I'm a strong believer in a message that was communicated to me by a person in this industry that I find very influential. His name is Salvatore Sincata. A long time ago, I was watching a tutorial that he was giving, presentation on Creative Life, and he said these words: innovate or die. And I took that and put it in my brain, and it became my mantra for a very long time. I wanted, and it wasn't just from a business perspective, as an artist, I wanted to continually innovate because there are so many stories up here and I am desperate to get them all out before I leave this world. And innovation is a way for me to do that. It's a way for me to continue to find ways to tell these stories. Plus, it makes my artwork something that always is growing, is always evolving, and that brings people to it. And they engage with it. And that's part of the purpose of why I go on this journey. So the gels, The Illuminate, the full spectrum units, I think they're amazing. I love using them. I still want to do some traditional work with the strobes and the light modifiers, but I want to continue to find ways to be able to use the Illuminate units, the full spectrum units. So definitely look at the Illuminate site, look at all the information that's available to them. I love what I see from the Canon EOS R5. I do like the Canon RF 24-70 f2.8 lens, and it is something that I'm glad that I went to these steps to see all of this, and that I'm sharing it with you. And again, those previous comparison videos on this channel, they are being created from a perspective of me wanting to be able to give you the best knowledge that I can to help you make the right choices for your dollars that you're spending, whether this is a hobby or a business. But as I went forward, I'm going to give you the information. If it makes me look like a fool, I simply don't care, because I want you to know what I know when I know it, and when I feel confident to share the information, because I want to try to tell you the right thing. So I like what I see here. I'm going to still wait and see what those new camera bodies are from Canon. But right now I like what I see from the R5 and that RF glass. From the retouching perspective, hopefully there's some information there that can help you out. So that's the end of our journey for this gel photography series. If you like the content you found in the video today, please give the video a like and consider subscribing to this channel, because new content will be debuting every week in photography and Photoshop education. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of that new content when you return to the YouTubes. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you out there in the world of Photoshop.